Imagine standing at your only daughter's wedding, surrounded by her new high society in-laws, only to hear your son-in-law laugh and tell a room full of people that you're just a waiter who shouldn't be bothered with the toast. The look of pity on their faces and the way my own daughter looked away in shame was the most painful moment of my life, but little did they know that the waiter they were mocking was about to become the headline of every news station in the country by the time their honeymoon started. I've spent 20 years sacrificing everything to give my daughter the world, only to be treated like an embarrassing secret on the biggest day of her life, and I have to ask you all, was I wrong for letting them believe the lie until it blew up in their faces? Or would you have stood up and ruined the wedding right then and there? I should start at the very beginning because this story isn't just about a wedding. It's about 20 years of sweat, grease, and a father's love that apparently had a price tag I couldn't afford. My name is David, and for 2 decades, I've owned a small, unassuming diner on the edge of town. It's the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and a grill that's seen better days, but it paid for my daughter Chloe's private school, her ballet lessons, and eventually her Ivy League tuition. When my wife passed away when Chloe was only 6, I made a silent promise at the funeral that I would never let her feel the sting of poverty or the absence of opportunity. I worked 16-hour shifts, often sleeping in the back office on a cot just so I could save every penny for her future. Every morning at 4 a.m., I was there scrubbing the floors, prepping the pancake batter, and ensuring the coffee was hot before the first factory shift workers arrived. I didn't care about the burns on my hands or the constant ache in my lower back. I only cared about the smile on Chloe's face when she showed me her report cards or her new drawings. Chloe was my world, and she knew it. We were a team, or at least I thought we were. But as she got older and started mingling with the children of CEOs and old money families at that fancy private school, I noticed a shift. The way she talked about my work changed from "my dad owns a business" to "my dad works in the food industry," and eventually to just silence. I remember one afternoon when she was 16. I showed up to pick her up from a tennis match in my work van, which had Dave's Classic Diner plastered on the side in bright red letters. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She walked right past me and climbed into the back seat of a friend's Mercedes, later telling me she didn't see me. That was the first time I felt the sting of being an embarrassment to the person I loved most. I went home that night and looked at my reflection in the greasy kitchen mirror, wondering if my hard work was actually pushing her away instead of bringing us closer. I decided to work even harder, thinking that if I could just give her more, she would finally be proud. I started looking into the stock market, spending my few free hours at the local library, teaching myself the intricacies of venture capital and emerging tech. I lived like a pauper while my bank account began to swell with figures I never imagined possible. Then came Julian. Julian is the kind of man who wears suits that cost more than my entire kitchen staff's monthly salary combined. His family owns a massive real estate empire, and from the moment Chloe introduced us, I could tell he looked at me like I was a smudge on a polished floor. He had this way of looking over my shoulder when I spoke, as if searching for someone more important to talk to. During our first dinner at a high-end steakhouse, which I insisted on paying for, though it cost me a week's profit, he asked me what I did, and before I could answer, Chloe jumped in and said I managed a local eatery. She didn't say I owned it. She didn't say I built it from nothing. I saw the flicker of disappointment in Julian's eyes, a sort of smug confirmation of his biases, but I let it slide for her sake. Over the next year, I watched my daughter transform into someone I barely recognized. She started wearing designer clothes I knew she couldn't afford on her entry-level marketing salary, likely gifts from Julian, and she began visiting the diner less and less. When she did come, she would complain about the smell of grease on her clothes. She would sit at the counter and pick at her food, looking around nervously as if a friend might walk in and see her there. It broke my heart, but I kept my mouth shut, thinking her happiness was the priority. When they got engaged, I was over the moon, thinking my little girl had found her happily ever after. I offered to pay for the wedding, using the massive nest egg I'd been building for 30 years, money I'd made not just from the diner, but from some very smart, very early investments in tech companies that I'd never told anyone about. Back in the early 2000s, a regular at the diner was a struggling coder who couldn't pay his bill. I gave him free meals for a year, and in exchange he gave me tips on where to put my meager savings. Those tips turned into millions, but I never changed my life. I liked my diner. I liked my customers. But Chloe turned me down. She told me Julian's family wanted a certain caliber of event and that they would handle everything. She said, "Dad, you just wouldn't understand the logistics of a high society wedding. It's better if you just show up as a guest." I felt a bit hurt, but I figured they just wanted to save me the stress. Little did I know, she had told Julian's parents that I was just a distant relative who worked as a waiter to explain why I wasn't involved in the planning. The day of the wedding arrived at a luxury estate that looked like something out of a movie. I showed up in my best suit, which was admittedly a bit dated, but I'd had it tailored and felt proud. As I walked through the gardens, I realized I didn't recognize a single soul. All of Chloe's old friends from our neighborhood were missing. It was all Julian's associates and high society types. When I tried to find Chloe before the ceremony, Julian intercepted me. He didn't hug me or shake my hand. He just looked me up and down and told me to stay out of the way of the photographers. He told me that visual consistency was important for the wedding album. I thought he was just stressed, so I took my seat. The ceremony was beautiful, but I was seated 4 rows back, behind Julian's distant cousins, and even his family's accountant. I was the father of the bride, yet I felt like a ghost in my own daughter's life. During the reception, the tension finally snapped. I stood up during the speeches, thinking it was finally my turn to tell my daughter how proud I was of her, and how I'd always be there for her. I tapped my glass lightly, but before I could speak, Julian took the microphone from the podium. He chuckled into the mic and said to the 300 guests, "Oh, don't mind David, everyone. He's just a waiter at a local diner, and got a bit confused about the program. He's used to serving people, not speaking to them. Let's leave the toasts to those of us who actually have something to say, shall we?" The room erupted in polite, condescending laughter. I looked at Chloe, pleading for her to say something, to tell them I was her father, the man who paid for her life, but she just stared at her plate, her face turning a deep shade of red. She didn't defend me. She didn't even look at me. I felt like the floor had opened up. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't scream. I simply set my glass down and walked out of that mansion, realizing that the daughter I raised had traded her soul for a seat at a table that didn't even want her father there. I drove back to my small apartment above the diner, sat in the dark, and realized it was time to stop being just a waiter. You see, what Chloe and Julian didn't know was that for the last 5 years, I had been the anonymous lead donor for a massive urban redevelopment project that was about to turn the entire downtown area, including several of Julian's family's failing properties, into a multi-billion-dollar tech hub. I wasn't just a diner owner. I was the majority shareholder of the firm that held the debt on Julian's father's primary office building. I had kept it all quiet because I wanted to live a simple life, but Julian's public humiliation of me changed everything. He wanted a world based on status? Fine. I would show him what real status looked like. I spent that night going through documents, making calls to my lawyers, and preparing for the ultimate revelation. I wasn't just going to take my money back. I was going to take their pride. So here I am, sitting on a secret that could bankrupt the very family my daughter just married into. I had a choice to make. Do I stay silent and let them live their lie? Or do I show them exactly who they were laughing at? Before I tell you how I handled the next 48 hours and the absolute chaos that ensued when the cameras started rolling, I want you to pause. Comment below. If your own child sat by while you were insulted like that, would you seek revenge, or would you take the high road? I really want to know if I'm being too cold, or if this was justified. The Monday after the wedding, Julian's father, Marcus, had a massive press conference scheduled. He was planning to announce a new luxury development, a project that his family had bet their entire fortune on. They needed the city's approval and a massive infusion of capital from a silent partner, who had been funding the groundwork. That silent partner was me, operating through a private equity firm called the Blue Plate Group. A little nod to my diner's special. I decided that Monday morning would be the perfect time to stop being silent. Instead of showing up to the diner in my apron, I put on a custom-made Italian suit I'd bought years ago for a gala I never attended. I called my legal team and told them I wanted to exercise my right to an immediate audit and a public withdrawal of support for Marcus's project, citing irreconcilable differences in professional ethics. When I arrived at the city hall where the press conference was being held, the security tried to stop me, thinking I was a protester. I handed them my ID and my firm's credentials, and their eyes nearly popped out of their heads. I walked onto that stage right as Marcus was mid-sentence, talking about the visionary leadership behind the project. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He actually tried to whisper to me to get off the stage before I embarrassed myself, thinking I was there to beg for a job or cause a scene about the wedding. He hissed, "David, this isn't the place for a serving man. Get out before I have you arrested." I didn't say a word to him. I just stepped up to the mic, looked directly into the cameras, and announced that I was the primary investor and that as of that moment, I was pulling every cent of funding. I explained that the Blue Plate Group would no longer be associated with individuals who lacked the basic human decency to respect the very people who build our communities. The room went into a frenzy. Reporters were shouting, and Marcus looked like he was having a heart attack. He tried to grab my arm, but my security, actual professional security that I'd hired that morning, stepped in. Within minutes, the news was everywhere. My face was on every local and national business channel. Local diner owner revealed as reclusive billionaire philanthropist. The irony was delicious. The man they called a waiter was the man who held their entire future in his calloused hands. My phone started blowing up immediately. First, it was Chloe. She called me 30 times in an hour. When I finally picked up, she was sobbing. She told me Julian was losing his mind, that his father was facing total financial ruin because of my withdrawal, and that they were being evicted from the honeymoon suite in the Maldives because their credit cards, which were tied to the family business, had been frozen. They were stuck halfway across the world with no way to pay the bill. She asked me, "Dad, why didn't you tell me? Why would you do this to us?" And I simply replied, "I tried to, Chloe. I tried to give you a speech at your wedding. I tried to be your father, but your husband told everyone I was just a waiter. I decided to start acting like the man he thinks I am. Someone who doesn't belong at your table. If I'm just a waiter, I certainly don't have the resources to fund a multi-million-dollar empire, right?" The fallout was swift and brutal. Marcus's company folded within months. The debt I held on their buildings was called in, and since they had no capital to pay, the properties were seized. I didn't just take the buildings. I took the very ground they stood on. Julian, who had never worked a real day in his life, and had spent his entire existence looking down on people like me, suddenly found himself looking for a job with a name that was now poison in the real estate world. Nobody wanted to touch the family that had been publicly humiliated by their own silent partner. Julian's high society friends disappeared overnight. The invitations to exclusive parties stopped coming, and the country club revoked their membership for non-payment. Chloe tried to come crawling back a few weeks later, showing up at the diner in her luxury SUV that was already scheduled for repossession. She was crying, saying she didn't mean to hurt me, that she was just caught up in the moment. But I knew better. I saw the look in her eyes. It wasn't regret for hurting her father. It was regret for losing her lifestyle. I told her that my diner was always hiring if she wanted to learn the value of a hard day's work, and that she could start by scrubbing the same floors that paid for her Ivy League degree. She looked at me with horror, as if the idea of working was a death sentence. She left in a huff, but I knew the reality would set in soon. She tried to go to Julian's parents for help, but they were living in a small 2-bedroom apartment, blaming Chloe and me for their downfall. The toxic environment she'd married into had finally turned on her. In the end, I didn't do it just for revenge. I did it because I realized that by hiding my success and shielding her from the reality of hard work, I had accidentally raised a daughter who only valued people based on what she thought they could do for her social status. I had failed her by making things too easy. It was a hard lesson for both of us. I still run my diner, and I still wear my apron every day because I love what I do. I love the smell of the coffee and the sound of the bell ringing when a new customer walks in. But now when people walk in, they don't look at me with pity or see, just a waiter. They look at me with respect. Not because of the money, but because they know I'm a man who knows exactly who he is, with or without $1 billion in the bank. I used a large portion of the seized assets to set up a scholarship fund for children of service workers, ensuring that no one ever has to feel ashamed of their parents' honest labor. I also bought back the old park in our neighborhood and renovated it, naming it after my late wife. Julian and Chloe are still struggling, living in a small rented apartment, and working entry-level jobs they hate. Julian is currently a junior clerk at a firm that used to fear his father, and from what I hear, he's not very good at it. He spends most of his time complaining about the unfairness of life. Chloe hasn't spoken to me in months, but I saw her recently on social media, working a shift at a coffee shop. It brought a tear to my eye, not out of sadness, but out of hope that she's finally learning. She looked tired, but she was smiling at a customer. Maybe, just maybe, she's finding the version of herself I used to know. While it hurts to see my daughter struggle, I know this is the only way she'll ever find her way back to being the girl I raised before she got lost in the glitter of high society. True wealth isn't found in a bank account or a fancy suit. It's found in the pride you take in your work and the way you treat the people around you. If you think I did the right thing by teaching them a lesson in humility, hit that like button. If you think I should have been the bigger person for the sake of family, and kept funding their lifestyle despite the insult, tell me why in the comments. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about people getting exactly what they deserve, and the hidden lives of people you might pass every day. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that you should never judge a book by its cover, or a billionaire by his apron. I'll see you all in the next story.